So welcome everybody, I'm Dean Cole, and I am so glad to have you joining me for this workshop on time management. There are a few important notes that I want to share to get started. First of all, as I mentioned, this workshop is being recorded. I know that most of you have your cameras off. That is perfectly fine. If you have any questions, Dean Sollenberger is monitoring our chat for us today, and I'll have an opportunity at the end of each section to respond to any questions you have. So please feel free to use the chat for questions. This is a long workshop, 1 to 3, and so we're going to take a little break at 2 o'clock. So don't worry if you need to get up and get a drink. I mean, clearly I can't see you doing that. So if you need to do that while I'm talking, that's fine, but know that we will take a planned break right around 2 o'clock. I emailed handouts for you. So you have a copy of this PowerPoint, and then you have a worksheet. And my hope is that you'll follow along and complete some of the questions on the worksheet. So you can either do that electronically on your computer, or you could print it out, or you could just have a piece of paper handy to jot down the answers to some of the questions that I'll pose for you. So that's meant to help you get the most out of this workshop. And as I mentioned, Dean Sollenberger is monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions or issues, she is the one to reach out to. All right, so let's get started. The goals of this workshop are as follows. There's 3 topics we're going to cover, and so I've broken down the workshop into 3 units. So first, we're going to analyze and evaluate your previous time management challenges. Second, we're going to talk about causes of procrastination and discuss ways to overcome those causes. And third, we're going to discuss planning systems for the spring semester. So as I mentioned, I've emailed you the slides and the handout. I want you to be able to continue to review these topics from now until when classes start. So that's why I wanted to make sure you had those handouts instead of just sharing the presentation. We'll wrap up the workshop today with a panel of students who are going to share some of their experiences with time management. So I'm hoping that this will be a really productive workshop for you and that you'll be able to take away some really crucial information as we go forward. All right, so throughout this workshop, there's a few things I want you to keep in mind. I want this to have a little bit of focus for you. You will get the most out of this workshop if you think about how you personally can make use of what we talk about. So try to focus on your own commitments, your own schedule, your own plans as we talk. And you're very likely doing some things that are already pretty good when it comes to time management. So keep this in mind because I want you to focus on what you're doing that is already pretty good and use that to help you overcome the challenges that you face when it comes to time management. Use your strengths to overcome your weaknesses, okay? So let's dig in to Unit 1, which is evaluating and analyzing your time management issues. To start, we're going to try to understand these a little bit. Everyone has different challenges when it comes to time management. So as we work through this, remember, I want you to focus on you. Don't focus on generalities, focus on your own struggles. Make this useful for you personally. Okay, so I want to share, for me personally, I struggle with 2 things when it comes to time management. The first is that I tend to put off things that are going to be hard or complicated. Can anyone relate to that? I know that most of the time when I talk to people, they can relate to that kind of thing. I do this both at home and at work. And in fact, I even put off planning this workshop. I was working on this PowerPoint up until maybe around 11 o'clock this morning. So know that this is a very common thing. It's definitely something that I struggle with. The second thing is that I find myself spending so much time on my phone. I imagine that a lot of you can probably relate to that. I find that I end up looking at the same things over and over and over again. You look at your phone 1 minute, 5 minutes later, not much in the world has changed, right? So I do that and I do that too much. And then I get to the end of the day and I wonder where the whole day has gone. That's certainly something that I struggle with. So what I'd like you to do is think about 2 challenges that you face related to time management. And while you're doing that, I also want you to think about 2 things that you're really good at related to time management. Okay, so I am going to give you 2 minutes to work on this. And I'm about to set a timer. When the timer goes off, a sound will sound, and we will continue. Okay, so take a look at your worksheet if you have it in front of you. If you don't have it in front of you, these are the questions: what 2 challenges you face related to time management, and 2 things that you're really good at related to time management. Okay, go ahead and start. Okay, it looks like my timer had a little bit of a snafu there. When I tried it out this morning, it worked just fine, so I apologize. But I do want to continue to honor your time. So I hope you had enough time to answer those questions. If you need to continue, keep working, no problem. So what I want to do now is talk about some of those challenges. We're going to do a quick poll, and I'm going to ask you to respond to this poll. What are the biggest time management challenges that you face? I'm going to ask you to choose one of them. So here you go. Answer this question for me. What is the biggest time management challenge that you face? This is fantastic. I'm going to end the poll. Most of you have voted, and I'd like to share these results with you. So, out of these options that I provided, a lot of you said that avoiding procrastination is a real challenge for you, and I totally get it. Clearly, that's something that I struggle with as well. Staying on task while working is absolutely another challenge that students face. I talk to students about that all the time. And so the good news is I'm going to cover both of those things in this workshop. I am going to cover sort of some of the other things too about finding enough time in the week and saying no to fun things, but I definitely have some tools that can help you with staying organized. And I asked this question and made you choose just one thing, but chances are most of you struggle with all of these things at some point in time. I know that I do. And what's fascinating about these responses, okay, so I'm going to stop that poll, is that when it comes to time management challenges, sometimes they have to do with organization and sometimes they have to do with willpower. And from what you shared, that a lot of you struggle with avoiding procrastination, that's not necessarily something that a calendar is going to help you with or some kind of tool, right? Um, some of the tools I show you will certainly help with organization, but I'm going to talk about willpower as well. Those tend to be the harder challenges to tackle. I certainly have some tools to help though. So out of these challenges that I listed in the poll, some of them have to do with organization, some have to do with willpower, right? So the first one, finding enough time in the week, that really has to do with both. There's only 168 hours in every week. You spend about a third of that time sleeping. As a college student, you really want to be spending about a third of that time academically, so in class, doing homework, that kind of thing. And that only leaves a third of your time for everything else that you have to do: laundry, showering, eating, having fun, all of those things. So when it comes to finding enough time in the week, organization is only going to get you so far. There's a lot that has to do and depends on willpower as well. Avoiding procrastination is certainly about willpower. Saying no to fun things as well, that is certainly a willpower based thing. Now, staying organized to meet deadlines, that is something that organization and specific tools can really help with. And staying on task when working is something that actually is both of these things. Willpower is a big part of it, but organization can help with that too. So, what's fascinating is you hear so frequently from upper class students that when they first started college, their biggest issue is time management, right? And when I think it's sort of a misnomer because the idea of management implies that there's some kind of tool or strategy that you can use. And so much of time management boils down to willpower and choice. And those are not easy things to manage and to control. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that so much of time management comes down to the idea of willpower and choice. Okay? So let's take a minute and put some of this together. On the worksheet, the third and fourth questions have to do with willpower, uh, asking whether the challenges that you face have to do more with organization or with willpower. And then I want you to go back to that second question I asked. How can you use what you're good at to tackle your challenges? And I want to go back to my example, okay? So I am really good at keeping track of things. I live by my calendar. I put everything in there. It keeps me organized. And so when it comes to overcoming the challenge of having trouble getting started when things seem really overwhelming or complicated, if I break things down into smaller pieces and then I put those smaller pieces on my calendar helps me stay not just organized, but motivated to get things done. Okay. So that also relies on my other strength, which is planning. I'm really good at kind of breaking something down. So when I have the motivation to break things down, then I'm able to use what I'm good at to help conquer what I know I struggle with. Okay. So when it comes to that one with using my phone too much, that is definitely more about willpower. And it's not an easy fix. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the tools section of the workshop. But I really want you to keep in mind how much willpower and choice play into time management. Okay, so I'd like you to take 2 minutes and answer these questions on your worksheet. And after you're done with those questions, we're going to move on to the next unit. So if you have any questions so far, be sure to put them in the chat and I will check in with Dean Sollenberger to make sure that I get them answered. But right now, I want you to take 2 minutes and answer these questions. First, are your time management challenges more about organization or willpower? And second, how can you use what you're good at to help you tackle your challenges? And try to think about that like a formula. Okay, go ahead. That's exciting. The timer works beautifully that time. Okay, so let me check the chat here. All right, we have one question. So Dean Sollenberger, is that a question that you want me to answer during the break or now?
It's up to you. Right now would be, I think, a good time for question. So
I'm
how else can I use planning or organization to motivate myself to not procrastinate and stay on task?
What a great question. What a great question. And I think that the question will be answered in Unit 3 when we talk about tools, because that's what I'm going to try to put some of this together for you. So, whoever asked that question, if what we talk about does not answer your question, please follow up with me individually because I want to make sure that I get that answered for you. Um, Great question. Keep them coming, please. I'm happy to address them at any point. So, Unit 2 is all about procrastination. So, what I'd like to do is use the chat window to hear from everybody. We're going to start with something a little bit fun. Everybody has their own thing that they like to do, sometimes only when you're putting off doing something else. For example, last weekend, I was procrastinating. I can't remember what it was, doing laundry. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. So instead of doing, I think it really was laundry. Instead of doing laundry, I sat and I cleaned out, get this, 5,000 emails from my junk email. It's junk email. It goes right into the junk folder. I did not need to be doing that. I have an unlimited storage in my Gmail, but for some reason, I thought it was very important for me to go through and I watched my email box go from 10,000 down to 5,000, right? So, what I'd like you to do is share with the group what you do when you are trying to avoid doing something else. And we can probably all relate to some of these. One person mentioned TikTok, and I'm a little too old for TikTok. Clearly, I can't even say it, but yeah, definitely. YouTube, yes. Ooh, ridiculously intricate nail art. I love that. These are so great. These are great options. I hope you're all taking a look. I've recently discovered Reddit myself, so that's one of my new time wasters too. Wow, some of you are really healthy with some of the things you do, watching, walking, jogging. Wow, I can relate to so many of these. I hope the rest of you can too. Isn't it fascinating? There's so much that we have access to that we can do to procrastinate. I think about times well before the internet, well before electricity, and what did people do? So much of this is web-based and electronics-based. There's a lot of things that we can do to procrastinate. All right, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone for sure. So when it comes to procrastination, there's a lot of reasons why people procrastinate. We're going to start here. So the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that sometimes there are just tasks that we don't want to do. Sometimes procrastination is just a matter of having something better to do. And sometimes the better thing is not anything really important or earth shattering. Sometimes just sitting and watching another episode of a show is more pleasant than vacuuming, right? So sometimes procrastination is just a matter of not wanting to do something because there's something slightly better to do. I don't discount that at all. We're biologically programmed to want to do things that are pleasant, right? But there are some other reasons, more complex reasons why people procrastinate. So, what I'm going to do is talk through these reasons with you and share some tips for how to overcome these. Chances are there's not one main reason why you procrastinate. You may find yourself procrastinating for different reasons at different times. So, as you're listening to these reasons, think a little bit about a time that you may have experienced something like that. Like I said, I want this to be useful to you. And so think about whether there's something that you can relate to in each of these. It might help you own them a little bit and find ways to cope with them that really work for you. Okay, so let's talk about this first one, fear. So fear is something that we all experience, right? We all experience new things sometimes, and that means that what you have in front of you might be unknown, right? And so sometimes fear is fear of the unknown. Sometimes the fear is the fear of disappointing someone. Sometimes it's fear of disappointing yourself, but it might be fear of disappointing your professors, your family, other people. And that's pretty profound. But one of the things that you can use to cope with this is reminding yourself that you have experienced new things in the past. And even if what you have in front of you is completely new, there may be aspects of it that are not new to you, right? So even if a particular task is foreign, for example, this workshop, I've done a lot of workshops in person. I've done a lot of meetings in Zoom, but I've only done one or two workshops via Zoom. I've never done one for this many people. So it took a lot of planning and thinking to think back about what worked well in some of the workshops that I did in person, what worked well in some of the workshops or meetings that I did in Zoom, and try to put those pieces together. Because once I started to think about what I had already done that worked, I felt a little bit more confident going forward in putting this whole workshop together. So even though I'm nervous about how this is going, I've done similar things before. And I was able to relate those similar things that I've done before to this current thing to help me get over the fear of disappointing all of you, because it's real. I can relate to this one for sure. Okay, the second reason why people procrastinate is the sense of overwhelm. And a lot of people might say, I don't even know where to start. I have so much to do, or this feels so big that I don't know where to start. Sometimes things are really complicated, or you just have a lot that you have to do. And this is also something that is really common for students, right? You have a huge workload ahead of you. And sometimes, especially as you get further along, the projects and the assignments that you have are more complex. And so it's very common to feel this way. One of my favorite movies is The Wizard of Oz. And when Dorothy is in Munchkin Land and she is about to start on the yellow brick road, Glinda the Good Witch comes in and Dorothy says, "Oh, how do I know where to start?" And Glinda says, "It's always best to start at the beginning." And I'm going to disagree. That is not the best way to deal with this sense of overwhelm. Starting at the beginning means that you are starting at zero and there's a million things laid out in front of you. And that's not the best way to deal with something that feels overwhelming. What I encourage you to do is start with what's easiest or start with what you feel confident about. For example, when you're writing a paper and you don't know where to start, staring at a blank screen is not going to help you, right? Sometimes trying to write the introduction for a paper is one of the hardest things to do. It's not going to get you anywhere if you are feeling overwhelmed and you try to start with this introduction that is supposed to be wonderful and tells you everything you need to know about the paper that you're about to read. But if you start with something like the key points you want to make, or some resources that you know you want to use, or maybe you start writing your works cited page, then you've got a little bit down already. You're not starting from zero. You have a little bit of work done, and then it can start snowballing a little bit. Once you're not feeling quite so overwhelmed anymore, then you can start breaking things down into more manageable steps, and then you can tackle things one step at a time. This is the kind of thing that's really useful for um, term papers, right? And a lot of your professors actually try to do this for you. They might give you an assignment that you have this long semester long paper that you have to write. And they break it up. First, you write a prospectus or like an abstract. Then you write uh, an annotated bibliography, and then you write a chapter or an introduction or whatever. So your professors know that this is a common thing. And a lot of classes will have an assignment that is broken down like this, and it's exactly for this reason. So follow that guidance, that modeling that you get, and remember that you never have to start at the beginning. The beginning is often a really tricky place to start, and it can feel really overwhelming. All right, the next reason for procrastination that I want to talk about is perfectionism. And this is complex because perfectionism in general can also be something that is clinical. So I don't want to get into that. I'm not a psychologist. What I am talking about is more situational perfectionism, not something that rises to a clinical level. But what this is putting off work out of fear that it won't be good enough, holding yourself to unrealistic standards. And this is really tough because we all want to be good at what we do, right? We have a motto at the college: do great work. And that's a lot of pressure. Coping with that pressure takes a little bit of unpacking. And so the way that you cope with this is to think about who is demanding perfection. Is it your professors? That's unlikely. Um, they should, and most of them do, care more about learning than perfection. You wouldn't be in college if you weren't here to learn. If you were already perfect, why are you here? So that's one of the strategies when you are feeling that rumination about perfectionism. We want you to try to slow down and remember that you are here to learn. When you do an assignment and you get some questions wrong, that's okay, because what that does is it allows you to discover what the gaps are in your learning. It allows your professors to understand what they're not teaching so well and where you need help. So trying to reframe what you're experiencing can be a helpful way to cope with perfectionism. Um, it's important to think about, like I said, who is demanding that perfectionism. It's unlikely it's your professors. Sometimes there's this family pressure to be perfect, right? Sometimes we put that on ourselves. And if you are the one who's expecting perfection, then you are the one who gets to relax that standard a little bit. And there's a saying that can be really helpful in coping with perfectionism. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I'll say that again. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And what that means is if you focus too much on perfection, you might not get anything at all. And you could have had something that was pretty good if you'd relaxed your standards a little bit. Okay, now I'm not saying that your standards should be rock bottom. I do want you to do good work. I want you to be proud of the work that you do. But if perfectionism is one of the things that is causing you to procrastinate, these are things that I want you to think about. Okay, the next one, I hear this might be the most common thing that I hear from students when they talk about procrastination. They say that I do better under pressure, right? I think that in all the years that I've worked with college students, I probably hear this the most often out of everything. And what people say is that pressure helps them focus. And there is a legitimate biological reason for this. When you are under pressure, you've put yourself into a crisis situation. And so that same fight or flight response that your body kicks into when there's some kind of emergency, that kicks in. And so adrenaline, your body produces the hormone adrenaline, and adrenaline improves focus. So biologically, there's a reason why people think they focus better under pressure. It's because your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do in an emergency, in a crisis. So chances are when you are under that time crunch, when you've put yourself in that crisis, you are working efficiently, you are highly focused, and those are great things, right? But there are some things that you miss out on when you're constantly working in that state, and that is the chance to edit any work that you're doing, the chance to ask for help, the chance to process, to reflect, and for your brain to develop stronger neurological connections. So, yes, absolutely, there is a biological reason why you focus better and you are really efficient when you're working under pressure. And it's because you have put your body into that crisis response. It's not good for your body to constantly exist in that state. And ways that you can cope with this is one, acknowledging this, right? You need to understand it's real, it's absolutely real, but it's not great for you. So, one of the things that can help with this is planning and organizing. So, the tools that I'm going to show you when we get to Unit 3 can be really helpful with this. Okay. The second thing to help you cope with this is reminding yourself of the advantages of working ahead, right? Yes, when you wait until the last minute, you're more focused and you may be really efficient. Okay, but those things that you miss out on, the ability to reflect, to edit, to ask for help, to do things over if you screw them up, you're missing out on all of those advantages because you are saving everything until the last minute. This is a tough one, right? It's if you are used to that adrenaline and you're used to working that way and you feel like you've done okay that way all along, it can be really hard to break that habit. But when it comes to being a more strategic and a more responsible student, which is one of the things that helps train you to be a more strategic and responsible employee and worker when you leave college, is getting past some of these bad habits that you might have. Yes, they work for you for now, but they're not always going to work for you. So it's important to try to learn some of these better habits when you're a student and you have the opportunity to do this when the stakes are a little bit lower. Okay, so one of the last ones that we're going to talk about is difficulty prioritizing. And this is absolutely legitimate. This is one of the causes of procrastination that organization can really help with, though. So I hear students say this, I have so much going on that all needs to be done at the same time. How do I get started? Right? You might have multiple assignments that are all due right around the same time. You may have overlapping deadlines, like 2 exams in one day, and you need to try to study for both exams at the same time. This can be really difficult. Now, like I said, organization can be essential with this. If you have a calendar that lays out when all of your assignments are due for the whole semester, you can easily identify what is due first, what is due second, and then you know what you have to prioritize and get done first. If you've got a lot of things due at the same time, then you might need to prioritize differently. Okay, so how to cope? I've listed a couple of things here. Ideally, if you're organized, when you're prioritizing your assignments, the first thing you want to do is consider what's due first, right? The goal would be to get all of your work done on time. So you need to prioritize the things that are most time sensitive. If you have everything that's due right at the same time, you can't use that as a way to prioritize. So then what you want to do is prioritize the assignments that are worth the most points. So this means being strategic, going back to your syllabi and looking at what each task is worth, right? If you have a big paper that's due that's worth 20% of your grade, you want to focus on that over the homework assignment that might be worth 1% of your grade. And that way, if you don't get that 1% assignment done, your grade only suffers by 1%. But if you don't get that 20% assignment done, that's a bigger chunk of your grade. Now, the last thing that I'll say about prioritizing is you might need to consider turning things in late. If you've gotten behind, if you have way too much going on all at the same time, you may need to turn something in a little bit late. And this is where reading your syllabus can be incredibly valuable as well. Many professors will have some sort of policy about late work. Maybe they give you a pass, like, yes, you can turn this in late. I don't take off any points for lateness. Some professors might say, I take off 10 points every day that it's late. Some professors might give you a one-time homework pass where you don't have to do something once. Your syllabus is an important document. It's kind of like having the instructions for a game that you're playing. If you need to refer back to them in order to figure out how to strategize, you've got your syllabus there. And when it comes to prioritizing, the timing is important to prioritize, but also the value of the assignment. And then the third thing that you need to think about is what the rules are, what your professor has set out. Okay, so I see a question in the chat, which is a great question. Is it all right to set an artificial deadline or have an accountability buddy? I love that question, and that is what we're going to cover in section 3 as well. So fabulous question. You're definitely thinking in the right way, and I'm glad for that. So we have gone over a lot of information about procrastination, and what I'd like you to do now is take a minute to reflect. And on the worksheet, for Unit 2, the questions are listed there, and I want you to take a few minutes to think about this. Remember, as I talked about procrastination, I encouraged you to think about a time that you may have experienced some of these things. So I'd like you to think about one of those reasons why you procrastinate. Think about a particular situation that you found yourself in. And I want you to think about those coping strategies that I listed and think about what you specifically can do when you're experiencing that type of procrastination. And as you are thinking about these questions, feel free to add more questions into the chat, and we will address them shortly. Okay. So that was 2 minutes, and you're welcome to continue working on those questions. I have a couple of questions that came in the chat that I'd like to address, and I'm so glad you're asking questions. Please keep them coming. So one person asked, how do you create incentives to start work sooner rather than later? Um, and this is someone who gives in to vices too soon when not enough work is done. I do have a tool that I'm going to talk about that can help with this. This is absolutely a willpower thing, right? When you're working and maybe things aren't going so well, or you start to get distracted. I know I am kind of a news junkie. So when I get distracted, when my focus and my concentration are not there, I automatically go and click and read some news. The news doesn't change from 5 minutes to the next, I swear, but I still keep doing it. So we do have a tool that I'm going to talk about that can help with that. So put that one in the parking lot for now. The next question is, how do I cope with a lack of motivation? And motivation is absolutely something that I'm going to cover in the next section too. I am smiling, not because I'm glad that you have these issues. I'm glad that you're asking about them, but I'm also glad that I'm going to be able to cover some of these things. I'm glad that I kind of went to the right place when I was planning this workshop, because time management is something that we all struggle with. It's not just a student issue. I have not been a college student for over 20 years, and I still struggle with time management every single day. It's the kind of thing that you will come back to at various times in your life. You know, you may really get the hang of it this year, this semester, and that'll be fabulous. And then your first year out of college, when you've got a lot of different things on your plate, you start to struggle with it again. And so you need to come back to it. So hopefully some of the things that we talk about and the tools that I share will be things that you can continue to use throughout your life, not just as a college student. Okay, I want to share one more thing about procrastination. And this comes from an article, and I gave you the link to this article on the handout. The author of this article talks about research that describes procrastination as a form of self-harm, which I thought was a really interesting take. And so I encourage you to read this a little bit. When we procrastinate, we're doing something that we know is not good for us, and we're still doing it. And so it's all about the feelings and the negative associations that we have around tasks, right? It causes stress and anxiety, a lot of self-blame, low self-esteem. And so how do you cope with this aspect of procrastination? It's really important to not forget about this. Okay, we are human beings. We have brains, we have hearts, and it is really important to take care of ourselves emotionally too, not just academically, not just in terms of getting everything done, but taking care of yourself emotionally. And so the two pieces of advice that the author of this article shares are these. First, practice forgiving yourself for mistakes. And you need to practice being as kind and compassionate as you are to other people, to yourself, right? So, what would you tell a friend who is beating themselves up for waiting until the last minute to do something? What would you tell your friend? Practice telling yourself that same thing. It's important to think about the positive aspects of completing something. Think about the other times that you've done something well, right? I've tried to encourage you to focus on using your strengths and using your past successes to help you move forward. And that ties into emotional regulation as well. I think that you're going to procrastinate. It's inevitable. I know that I do it myself, but it's important to remember this emotional part of procrastination as well. Who knew this workshop would be getting so deep, right? Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a bit of a brain break, okay? When I created the slide, I said 5 minutes, but I think I'd like to take 10 minutes, if that's okay with you. It is currently 1:47 on my clock, so I'm going to set a timer for 1:57, and we will come back and continue the workshop. And like I said, the next section is going to be about tools. Uh, and hopefully some of these tools will be useful for you as you cope with some of the things that we've talked about. Okay. So keep your sound on because I will let everybody know when it's time to come back, but I'm setting my timer right now for 10 minutes. Okay. Brain break time. Okay, folks, that was our timer. So please come on back, have a seat in front of your screen again. Um, Welcome back. I hope you really did take a break from the screen. It's important to do that. I did for a couple of minutes. I had to use the bathroom, but then I was prepping and making sure that I read some of your questions that are coming in, and I want to address some of those before we move on. So we had a question about not using the phone as a form of procrastination. Man, am I the wrong person to talk about this? I do the same thing myself. I've actually been trying to work on cutting down on phone time. And one of the things, actually, the only thing that has been successful for me is literally putting a barrier in between me and the phone. So trying to leave my phone up in my bedroom when I'm downstairs working during the day, um, or putting my phone in a different room when I go to bed at night so that I don't just lay in bed and play on my phone until I fall asleep. Um, I think it's very common for us to be glued to our phones these days. And so you may need to actually physically distance yourself from your phone in order to work on breaking that habit. If you're a little bit more disciplined, you may be able to use some of the features that are built in on your phone, like your screen time trackers and things like that. Some people are very disciplined in how they use those, which is fabulous. I am not. I've tried. I get the report every day, like your screen time was down this week or your screen time was up this week. But I haven't taken the time to dig in and figure out what that means or how to use that to guide my behavior. So in the meantime, I am creating some physical distance between me and my phone at certain times. Um, and when you are trying to do work, it's really important to do that. I am going to talk about some other tools in a little bit when I get into Unit 3. We had another question about, this is such a great question, so thank you for asking. Why is it easier to do things that are easier or more interesting first rather than doing hard things first? And honestly, there's two approaches to this. So some people really feel like you should tackle whatever is hardest or most complicated first, get it out of the way, and then you're coasting downhill to 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 do the easier things and you've got the biggest thing off your shoulders. Some people feel like it's easier to do easy things first to build up your confidence and your motivation and then to tackle the big thing. And honestly, both approaches are perfectly appropriate. It's a matter of personal preference. So if you're struggling with motivation, then jumping into something big and complicated may not be the right fit. If you are feeling motivated or you really think that having that big thing off your shoulders will motivate you, do that first. It's very similar to how people talk about debt. Some people feel like you should pay off the thing with the biggest interest rate first because you're going to pay more in interest, and then you can pay off the smaller things. And some people feel like the motivation to pay off small debts first will help you get into the habit so that then you can pay off the big thing. Both things accomplish the same goal of paying off debt in the end, but it's a matter of personal preference and tuning into how you are motivated by things. Sometimes you need to feed that part of your brain that gets rewarded by accomplishment. And so doing the small things first will help. Sometimes you need to feed the part of your brain that needs to get this big thing off your shoulders, and that's okay too. So if one way is not working for you, try the other way. But if the way that you're doing it is working for you, it's okay to keep doing that because the goal is still getting accomplished. And like I said, it's a matter of preference and getting to know yourself so that you understand how your brain works best. There was another question about knowing that you work really well under pressure. How do you convince yourself to start things earlier? And that's a little tricky. And I think we'll get into that when we talk about motivation. So that is coming up as well. Okay, so I've covered a couple of the questions so far. And as I get into Unit 3, if I miss a question or if I haven't really fully covered it, please don't hesitate to follow up and ask. Because I want to make sure that you come away from this with all of the tools and information that you think are going to be really helpful to you. Okay, so let's get into Unit 3. Unit 3 is about tools for planning and organization. And I'd like to do another quick poll. And this one is, about your preferred time management tools. Do you prefer to organize yourself using traditional paper planners and calendars or electronic tools or both? Let's see what the preferences are. All right, I'm going to stop the poll there and I'll share this with you. It is exactly what I expected. It's just about split. Half, not half, about a third of the people prefer to use paper, a third of the people prefer to use electronic or phone tools, and a third of you prefer to use both. And that's wonderful. The key to using tools is making them really useful for you. So what I'm going to do is show you tools that can be used in all formats, because you've got to figure out a system and tools that are going to work for you, because if they don't work for you, they are not going to work for you, right? You're not going to use them. And so it's not going to be beneficial in any way, shape, or form. So, all right, I'm going to actually talk about a couple of different categories of tools. I'm going to talk about tools that help with long-term planning, tools that help with short-term planning, and tools that help with motivation. And as a college student, you need some sort of tool from each of these categories. Sometimes you need different ones from each category, different semesters. But keep these categories in mind. There is no one tool that is going to be everything you need as a college student, but you need these three categories of tools to help you manage your time efficiently. Okay, so we're going to start with long-term planning. And this is not earth-shattering, right? You have probably thought about this before. Many of you probably have a planner of some sort. For long-term planning purposes, as a college student, your life is broken up into semesters. So each semester, you know that there are specific deadlines and specific tasks you need to complete on a specific timeline. And so for long-term planning purposes, you need to create some kind of calendar for the whole semester. So you can do this electronically. This is a screenshot from a Google Calendar, which is super easy to use. You can do this on paper. You can just print out blank calendar pages from any website or any office template. In our office, we tend to have a big picture calendar in paper that you could pick up and have for the semester. You could do this, I'm sure there are apps. You can do this in any way you want. You could actually get a calendar that people hang on the wall and do it that way. You could do a whiteboard, whatever you want to do, but it's going to be really important for you to have the whole semester laid out. And I encourage you to do this during the first week of classes. When you get your syllabus for each class, sit down with a calendar and each syllabus and fill in the important dates. So you want to start with dates from the academic calendar. Okay, so the first day of class is the last day of classes. Final exams. You want to fill in the last day of drop ad, which is always 2 weeks into the semester. You want to fill in the last day to withdraw from a class. If there are any breaks that semester, you want to fill in when those breaks are. That's how you kind of frame your semester. Then for each class, you want to fill in the big dates. So exams, presentations, papers, field trips, anything that is a big chunk of your grade, you want to fill that in on this big picture calendar. You don't want to include homework assignments or reading assignments, things that are due regularly. We're talking about what makes up the bulk of your grade in that course. So look at that percentage breakdown and put those events on the calendar. And then the last thing you want to include are important events. So if you are a student athlete and you know when your games are or your competitions for that semester, you want to put those on the calendar. If you have important interviews coming up, or maybe a family event, a wedding that you have to go to, put that on the calendar. The reason you want to do this is because it's going to help with planning. You can take a look at when your really busy weeks are going to be. It's very common for students to have exams and papers all due in the same week. You may even have days that are really pretty busy. So this helps you envision what the overlap is going to be. It helps you with the planning. If you know you have an important game coming up, but you also have a paper due the following day, that means you need to work on that paper well before that game. Okay, so the big picture planning is really important. You can do this on paper. You can do this electronically. If you do it electronically, or even on paper, some people really love to color code things, right? So on this calendar, I have the deadlines color coded as purple. I have a math course color coded as green, English is yellow, and Spanish is blue. You can color code things that way. You could add in pink for things that are personal, and that will help you stay organized. But it's going to help with the planning and the overlap aspect of time management. Like I said, not earth-shattering. Many of you probably do this already. I just want to encourage you to do that and do it as soon as you can once the semester starts. Usually during workshops, I would have you sit down and do this. It takes a little bit of time, but it's really valuable. Since the semester hasn't started yet, you certainly can't do it yet, but as soon as the semester starts, make sure that you make plans to do this. Okay, when it comes to short-term planning, I think this graphic just kind of encapsulates things in life for me quite a bit. Often I will tell myself I'm going to do something, right? I'm going to clean out the closet this weekend. And then I get to the end of the weekend and this is what's happened really in my weekend. Maybe I got a little bit of the closet cleaned out, but without a really solid concrete plan, this is what happened. So when it comes to short-term planning, a concrete plan is really essential to helping you be productive. So if you have something in your mind, that's great, but I would encourage you to externalize it, maybe to write it down or to verbalize it to somebody, because having a more concrete plan is going to help you be more efficient with what you do. And I'm not talking about anything fancy, okay? What I'm talking about is a to-do list, okay? So when you sit down to do work, let's say you go to the library one evening and you have all of your work due for the next day. How do you get started? A to-do list can be really helpful. You don't need to make a giant master to-do list for the whole week, but every time you sit down to do work, sit down and make a quick to-do list. And something as simple as a Post-it note, like this big, or an index card can be a beautiful tool for creating these very small to-do lists. If you give yourself a written focus for any kind of situation where you're trying to do work, so an evening, a weekend, whatever, it can be really powerful to help guide the work that you're trying to do. Okay, now, in addition to a basic to-do list, I am going to show you a tool that can be useful for a couple days at a time. So for example, a weekend. Weekends tend to be really wasted time for a lot of students. You give yourself a couple of days off because you feel like you deserve it, and then you get to Sunday night and your Sunday night becomes unmanageable because you have so much to do. So this is a 3-day planner. Okay, and you can use it for any 3 days in a row, but I like to show you how you can use it for a weekend because I think, like I said, weekends tend to be wasted time. So the way you start is just take any piece of paper and draw yourself what sort of looks like a tic-tac-toe board, right? So 4 columns instead of 3 and 4 rows instead of 3 rows. Then what you're going to do is break it into 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you break it into 3 chunks of the day, morning, afternoon, and evening, okay? This is a beautiful way to chunk your days as opposed to planning out every second of every day. That is not always efficient for everybody. For some people, it's fabulous, but I know for me that never quite worked. But chunking it up into 3 chunks instead of hour by hour really has worked for me well. So the first thing you do once you've created this is you block off the times that you know you're not available. So let's say you have class all morning on Friday. Saturday evening, you have plans. And Sunday morning, you realize you're probably going to want to sleep in because you'll be out kind of late on Saturday night. So you've blocked off 3 times when you are not going to be getting any work done. And that's okay. You don't have to be working 24/7. But what that means is you have these other blocks that you need to be responsible with. So the afternoon and the evening on Friday, and I'm not saying evening like up until midnight, but maybe evening like 4 to 6 or 5 to 8. Maybe you get some work done during that time. Maybe you get up on Saturday morning instead of sleeping in and get a couple hours of work done. And if you make good use of this time, then you won't be cramming all of your homework into that last block, the Sunday evening block, which I know happens a lot. It happened to me a lot as a college student. And what you can do with each of these tiny blocks is create your own little to-do list for that time. So here's what that might look like. Okay, so each of these blocks is really only a couple of hours. You're not going to get a million things done. And it's okay to give yourself something small to get done during a particular block of time. But if you break up your 3 days like this, then it's a lot easier to get just a couple things done in that last block. Can you imagine trying to get all of these things done in a Sunday evening? That would be completely overwhelming. But without planning ahead, you might end up doing that. Okay, so I've talked about 2 tools for short-term planning. The simple one, making a to-do list, which is so basic. It feels like it should be kind of self-explanatory, but a lot of times we don't do that. We don't sit down and kind of plan how we're going to spend our time. And then this 3-day planner, okay? So we've talked about long-term, we've talked about short-term. Now let's talk about motivation. And this gets at that willpower part of time management. And it can be a real issue. So I don't want to skip it. All right. So when it comes to motivation, there's 2 types. And this isn't earth-shattering either. There's intrinsic motivation. When you're intrinsically motivated to do something, it's coming from a place of interest and passion and curiosity. You maybe have a really strong connection to a particular assignment or topic. You are just so enamored by this particular thing that it's no question. You just automatically want to do it, right? And then there's extrinsic motivation. And this is something that you're motivated to do because something outside of you, some sort of force outside of your own intrinsic will, is guiding you to do something. So that is maybe like, I don't know, grades. Grades are a form of extrinsic motivation. Obligation, you feel like you have to do something because you're obligated to someone else or something else. Sometimes the motivation is you have to satisfy a particular requirement, or sometimes the motivation is fear, a fear of failure, a fear of disappointing somebody. So often we think that we have to really want to do something, that the motivation should always be intrinsic. And that's just not realistic. Sometimes there are things that we feel so wonderfully passionate about, and we're not even motivated to do those things, or something is getting in the way of that motivation. And the reason that I share this is because it's okay to rely on extrinsic motivation when you're not feeling that intrinsic motivation. It would be ideal if everything you did as a college student came from this place of passion and curiosity and connection. And I hope that you find things that do trigger that for you. But for me, for example, I had this one history class, and the only motivation that I had was I wanted to get a good grade in that class. And my roommate happened to be in the class. And so I had the extrinsic motivation of wanting to get a good grade. So I was going to show up and I was going to do the work. And I had the extrinsic motivator of someone saying to me, "Hey, are you going to class?" So it's okay to rely on that extrinsic motivation. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about tools that can help with that extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is intrinsic, it comes from within. And I hope that you're able to find things that trigger that for you, like I said, but it's okay to rely on extrinsic motivation when you don't have that intrinsic motivation, okay? So let's talk about some of these tools. The very first tool that I want to talk about is a really basic one, and you can use this on your phone, or you can use like a kitchen timer or a clock or something like that. Some people might use a website or an app, but the idea of a timer can be really powerful. It is a very basic extrinsic motivation tool. It's something that you can use to force yourself to commit to something for a specific amount of time, right? So I timed our break. And I set a timer on my phone. The timer went off. We came back from the break. This is a fabulous way to start because it doesn't cost any money. You likely already have a phone or a tool or something like that that you can try this with. And the way that I encourage you to use it is to set it for a specific amount of time. Sit down and write yourself a to-do list. So what are you going to do during that specific amount of time? Set the timer, get down to work and put your phone out of reach or put the timer out of reach, and then get to work. And when the timer goes off, that is when you're allowed to touch your phone or you're allowed to touch whatever it is the timer is on. And I encourage you to give this a try because, like I said, it can be a very low-tech way of testing out the idea of external motivation. When the timer goes off, give yourself a break, but maybe set a timer for the break as well so that you don't end up taking too much time. Um, if you need that kind of routine and that kind of structure to give yourself some of that external motivation, that's awesome. I use this all the time for myself, especially when I'm trying to do stuff around the house. And sometimes I set a timer and tell myself, like, I'm going to put my laundry away for 5 minutes. And it doesn't end up taking that whole time. So the timer can be a way to motivate you to get started on something. Okay, the second tool that I want to talk about is a browser blocker. This is very similar to the person who asked a question about how do you avoid using your phone. You've got to create some kind of barrier. Some people, like I said, are great with this. I'm not. So I need a barrier. And so for me, with the phone, the barrier is putting it in another room. So literally there are walls between me and my phone or floors between me and my phone. When it comes to the internet, it's a little bit harder because often you need to use the internet for the work that you're working on. And so creating a barrier between yourself and whatever it is that is distracting you can come in the form of a browser blocker. Browser blockers are very easy to use. It depends on the kind of computer you have. If you use a Windows PC, if you use Google Chrome, there are ones that you can download right into Google Chrome. If you use a Mac, there are different tools that you can use. What you need to do is figure out what kind of computer you have. Just do a quick search to find browser blockers. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. Some of them allow you to redirect to a different website, but you have to be really honest with yourself when you're using browser blockers. If like I don't browse YouTube, I don't watch videos. My husband does all the time, but I don't. So I wouldn't need to put YouTube as one of the websites that I block, but I would need to put Facebook, I would need to put Instagram, I would need to put Reddit, I would need to put CNN. Those are the ones that I find myself going to all the time, and maybe Gmail. So I would put them in there. And some browser blockers will allow you to set a schedule so that you can't access those sites during a particular time. And if you find yourself using a browser blocker and going around it to still access those, then clearly this is not a tool that's working for you. If you find yourself sitting down and using the browser blocker and it works for you, fabulous. But this one requires you to be really honest with yourself about what's working and what's not working. Okay, so those are two tech-based tools, different levels of tech. But the next thing that I want to talk about is accountability partners. And I know someone asked a question about this, so I'm really excited that it's come up. Now, under normal circumstances, the library at the college is really pretty full at night. If you've ever been on campus under normal circumstances, you go in and it is packed. It can be hard to find a seat. And I frequently hear students say that they like working in the library because other people are around, right? If you find yourself stuck in your room, you're there by yourself, it's lonely, you don't necessarily feel as productive. Whether the students realize it or not, they are relying on other students in the library as accountability partners, okay? They're doing it in a pretty passive way, but it works because other people know that they are there to do work and there's that social pressure to get work done. You might even casually chat about the work that you're doing, cheer each other on when you get something done, provide support for each other or encouragement to keep working. And as long as you're following the guidelines and the parameters that you're supposed to be following for your assignments, this is a great thing. Accountability partners are phenomenal, and you can do it in a really passive way like that, where you just happen to be kind of sitting with other people. Or if you can't congregate safely, or you don't necessarily have space in the library or something like that, you can do this in a lot of ways. So maybe you set up a Zoom study hall with some of your friends and you all are there, you're working independently in your rooms, but you're all in front of your computer working on Zoom. That way you can still provide that support and encouragement and breaks every once in a while, right? Maybe you, if you don't want to sit in front of a screen and be on Zoom all the time, maybe you text, like a group text to all of your friends and say, hey, what is everybody's goal for tonight? And then you can share your goals about what you want to get done, and you can check in with each other at the end of the night to see what you got done. It's okay to rely on family for these things too. Maybe you have a big paper that you're trying to work on, and your sibling is home. Maybe you ask your sibling to check in with you at the end of the night to find out how far did you make it. Now, I know that someone asked about how to convince yourself to work on an earlier deadline. If you know you normally work really well under pressure, so normally you kind of save things to the last minute. And accountability partners can be the key with this. So if you are the only one telling yourself that there's a fake early deadline, you're going to talk yourself out of that deadline and just put things off into the last minute. But if you tell someone else, all right, I'm setting this deadline for myself. The paper isn't really due for another week, but I want to get it done by this deadline so that I can go to the writing center and get some help with this. Externalizing that deadline, that new deadline, makes it real to someone else besides you. If you're anything like me, I'm the kind of person who can talk myself in or out of anything. So I really need to externalize things to be accountable to other people to get things done, because I could reward myself if I get nothing done. I can just tell myself, oh, you've had a hard day, even though you didn't get anything done, you got through it, and so you deserve this reward. That's not really going to fly for me. So I need these accountability partners. Now, like anything else, if you've got an accountability partner who is not really providing the accountability that you need, maybe you need to find somebody else to be an accountability partner for you. And I'll share that this has happened to me. I had a friend who, she and I both wanted to try to go to the gym more often. And so we came up with this great system. We even had like little cards that we were going to stamp every time we went to the gym. It was wonderful. We had this whole system worked out. The very first day that we were supposed to go to the gym, both of us flaked. We were terrible accountability partners for each other. So if you find that the person or persons that you're trying to rely on for accountability are not working out for you, find somebody else. It's important to have these other tools to use. So when you're struggling with that willpower part, you've got other people who can check in with you. Now, the last tool that I want to talk about is rewards. And everyone has different things that they consider rewards. Some people might be able to control themselves to put on one episode of a show if they get something done. I don't necessarily have that level of self-control, so that wouldn't work for me. But for me, I love coffee. I'm currently on my second cup of coffee just during this presentation. So for me, the idea of going to sit at a coffee shop like the Ugly Mug while I work on a particular assignment or task sounds amazing, right? I can go, I can sit, I can be in that environment, I can have something yummy to drink. Linking that task to that treat is something that would be motivating for me. I'd be motivated to go, to get it done. When I was done with my coffee, hopefully I'd be done with that task, and then it would make doing the task a little bit more pleasant. So sometimes you can link the reward to the task and as you're doing it, and sometimes you can use a reward to treat yourself after you've finished something. Either way works, but when it comes to rewards, it can be really useful, again, to externalize the arrangement that you're making with yourself. Otherwise, you might end up rewarding yourself when you don't really deserve that reward. And so you can do that by texting somebody, by posting something on social media, by having someone else tied to that reward with you. It's important to use the reward responsibly and to be accountable. Okay, so that is what I have to say about motivation tools. And I want to share one more thing about I guess motivation. It's kind of tied to motivation, but it's about concentration. I think that a lot of times you have a plan, maybe you made a to-do list, you have everything organized, you're sitting down to do something early because you created this big picture calendar, you have set up a reward. Once you complete this task, you're going to reward yourself by hanging out with friends. And then you sit down and you just can't stay focused. That is a really common thing that happens to a lot of students. So I want to share with you some details about concentration and how concentration works. So there's this thing, this author, Diane Van Blerkum, is fabulous, and she taught me about the concentration cycle. So we've got this circle here, and what I want you to envision is a clock, right? A circle on a clock is an hour. So when you sit down to do a task, let's pretend it's at the top of the hour, the first few minutes when you sit down and you're doing a task, let's say you're working on a reading assignment. You sit down, you're trying to read. The first few minutes, you're in a state of light concentration. It is very easy to get distracted. Maybe you end up reading the same sentence over and over again. You end up flipping through your reading, figuring out how much you have to do. You are not really engaged in that reading. You're not getting anything out of it. Now, that's normal. That happens for most people most of the time when they sit down to try to do a task. It's kind of like a warm-up period almost. Once you are through those first 5-ish minutes, then you're in a period of moderate concentration. So at that point, you aren't getting quite as distracted. You might not notice the same sounds that you noticed when you were in light concentration. You get a little bit deeper into the reading. You get a little bit more invested and interested in the work that you're doing. You don't find yourself reading the same thing over and over again. And that is leading into what's considered deep concentration. Okay, so the first 5 to 15 minutes of any time when you sit down to study, you're going to be a little distracted. It's normal. It takes some time to warm up. Just like an athlete, the first little bit of your athletic practice, whatever you're doing, you need to warm up a little bit. And that's what light and moderate concentration are. Once you get to the state of deep concentration, you're going to be a lot more efficient. You're going to be more interested and invested in what you're doing. That is when your work is going to be the most powerful. Now, deep concentration doesn't last forever. The reason why this author shows it on a circle, like a clock, is because you might only get 40 to 45 minutes of deep concentration before your brain needs a break. So here's the whole cycle. You start with light concentration, you move into moderate concentration, and then you're into deep concentration. And once you've kind of gotten to a reasonable stopping point, give yourself a break. It is really difficult to sustain a level of deep concentration for longer than 45 minutes to an hour. So keep this image in mind. When you're sitting down to do work, if you are not getting into it within the first few minutes, keep trying, push through it. Consider that kind of a warm-up phase, because this is how concentration works. You can't sit down and immediately start to concentrate. Okay, so we have gone through a lot of information now, and I want to have you do one more set of reflection questions. Okay, so on your worksheet, or wherever you're writing this down, what I want you to do is take 2 minutes and think about what tools you're going to use for this spring semester. Think about each of the 3 categories: long-term planning, short-term planning, and motivation tools. This is really truly for you. What are you going to use to help you with these 3 categories of time management planning? Okay, so after we come back, we're going to move to our student panel. So take a few minutes and work on this, and when the timer goes off, we will move into the panel. right. So we had another question come in, and I'm actually going to include this one in what I asked the student panelists to talk about. And it has to do with time management advice for people who are studying remotely. And I think that our student panelists will be fabulous at talking about that. What I'm going to do, since our panelists are here, hi folks, is I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint screen so that we can actually see the students' faces. So wonderful. All right. Sorry, let me get this all set up a little bit here. Okay, so we have two panelists here today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and to answer some questions that I have. When I asked them to be panelists, they shared that it's been a really long time since I have been a college student. And I was in college before any kind of social media existed. And I actually didn't even get a cell phone until my senior year of college. So I can talk conceptually about time management until I'm blue in the face. But when it comes to actually sharing some strategies and details, I thought it would be more helpful to hear from people who are living the life of college students right now to share their thoughts. So I am going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, to share their name, their class year, their pronouns, and anything else they would like to share about how they spend their time on campus. So Nathan, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Motel. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am class of 2023, which makes me a sophomore. I am a member of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity on campus, and yeah, that's pretty much me.
Great.
Hi everyone, my name is Carolina Fernandez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a chemistry major with an education minor, and I'm class of 2022. And my time is usually spent in a lab somewhere because I just like being in lab.
That is so awesome. I'm really grateful for the two of you and your willingness to share. One of the things that we've talked about a little bit in this workshop is how students can use what they're good at to overcome some of the challenges that they face when it comes to time management. So what are some of the challenges that you've faced with time management, and what are some of the things that you've done to try to address them?
I'd say my biggest challenge is I have ADHD, so staying focused on one thing, especially with technology. Um, my biggest challenge is my phone or my computer, which has made virtual learning pretty hard for me.
That's a great point. So were you studying remotely this past fall?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, what are some of the things that you did to help you stay motivated to get work done while you were studying remotely?
The best thing for me would be to find a totally separate space away from, say, my bedroom or any comfort spaces in my house, and to distance myself from my phone. So leave it in another room entirely.
I found myself, so I've been working from home, not studying from home, but working from home, and I needed to change locations myself. So for the most part, I worked at my kitchen table. I had a lot of meetings there. It was a nice, easy background. I could clear it off. But sometimes I just needed, that wasn't the right space for me to think. That was a great place for me to have meetings and to talk to people. But when it came to like sitting and thinking and writing or doing a project that required more focus, I actually ended up sitting on the floor in my living room at the coffee table. So this idea of changing venue can be really impactful. It can really change the energy of what you need to do. Carolina, what are your thoughts on what are some of the challenges you faced and how you've coped with them?
I think or I'm gonna say two of my biggest like challenges is procrastination, and then like I take advantage of free time too often. So like if I'm not in a lab, I'm definitely in my apartment watching Netflix or taking a nap. And so like the way that I like try to like deal with that is setting alarms on my phone so that um I don't overwatch Netflix. And then if I do take a nap, I like think, do I really need this nap right now? Or do I just feel like taking a nap?
It's one of the things that was really difficult for me when I was in college was working in my room. I couldn't do it. It took me until I think my senior year to figure this out. But for the first few years, anytime I would try to sit on my bed and do homework, especially reading, I would fall asleep because I just associated my bed with sleeping. And so, especially if it was reading that was really boring, I would fall asleep. So, one of the pieces of advice that I frequently give students is to study somewhere other than their room. But when it comes to virtual learning, especially if you are isolated or you have to quarantine in your space, you don't necessarily have a choice, right? Do you have any insight about that?
Yeah, so like studying virtually is definitely a lot harder because not only am I studying virtually, my brother's working from home. And so I'm going to talk about like spring semester, like when we got sent home, because that's when I was studying virtually. My dad was home, my mom was home, my sister was home, like everybody was home. And so it was just really hard to find an actual study space. And then on top of that, like I have a bird who likes to scream. It gets kind of distracting. So at least my way of trying to get through it is like music and headphones will help me focus, especially if it's loud enough that I can't hear anything in the background.
That's awesome. Nathan, do you have any insight?
I think music helps sometimes, but I think when I'm listening to music, I definitely get into this space where I'm in the light focusing phase. So I feel like I'm getting work done, feel productive. When I look back on it, I'm not really. For me, this past semester and the semester before, it was really crucial for me to make goals, but goals that I could achieve. And that's really how I set myself up to get my work done.
Do you have an example of that?
Breaking assignments down. So if I have a week to get something done, doing part of it every day, it sounds really corny, but it helps, it works, and it becomes less overwhelming.
Yeah, certainly. Now, one of the things that we talked about was accountability partners. Do either of you have people that you turn to when you need some help with accountability?
I I feel like I'm pretty good at keeping myself accountable. But if I have a friend in a class, then definitely we'll both help each other out.
What about you, Carolina?
I do. So last semester, I'm talking about the fall, the girl that I was living with, we held each other accountable. So like I would knock on her door and make sure that she was doing some work, or if we went somewhere together, and I saw her on her phone, I'd make sure like, hey, put your phone down. You gotta do some work. And then she'd do the same thing for me. And um, it was especially helpful just because we were like half of the classes we were taking, it was together. So like we could work on things together instead of just sitting there and like awkwardly just like, hey, are you doing your work?
That's a really good point. And so, Nathan, you mentioned this too, that when you've got people in the same class, it can be really useful to kind of communicate and help hold each other accountable. Um, it's kind of awkward to do that if you don't know anybody in the class. And so putting it out there at the very beginning of the semester can be helpful because at that point nobody knows anybody, and you could just put it out there like, hey, if anybody wants to do like a Zoom study hall tonight, or anyone wants to join a study group, then you're kind of opening it up to other people who might feel kind of awkward too. There was a question that came in the chat, and Nathan, I don't know if you are willing to talk about this or not, so feel free to say, no, I'd rather not talk about that. How do you manage procrastination as someone who has ADHD?
That's a good question. Um, at school, it's a lot easier because I can put myself in an academic space. I can go to the library. And for me, being around other people that are doing work kind of intimidates me and makes me feel like I should be doing work. So, but at home, it's really tough. It's hard to say. It's different for every person. Every person has varying degrees of ADHD, and you know, But for me, it is setting goals, like I've said, and coming up with rewards that are actually rewarding for me, not just something that I think I might want to do.
Do you have any examples?
I like running. So this past semester, I would set a goal to maybe get part or all of one assignment done. And at the end of that, go for a run. But it was important to make sure that I actually reached my goal before I, took my reward.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. You have to have the self-discipline
Right.
to commit to that. So I'm curious, have either of you experienced any major time management failures or mistakes that you are willing to talk about?
Yeah, so when was this? This was the semester when we got sent home. I was taking 5 classes with 3 labs, and then I was also working as a TA and I was doing research in the lab. And so I just let a lot of assignments like slip, and it was really hard to manage my time on campus. If we had stayed on campus, the way I would have managed it was probably like cutting back my research hours, and I mean talking to professors about deadlines. But luckily, like, we got sent home, so I wasn't doing research, and then the lab that I was TAing for was virtual, so I was able to do homework while I was working. So that just gave me a lot more free time to get work done. So I'm just gonna say right now, don't take 5 classes, especially with labs. Like, don't do it.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's a big workload just to do 4 classes most of the time. What about you, Nathan? Any big mistakes or failures that you care to admit to?
Yeah, I would say this past semester, I'm a bio major, so I take a lot of lab classes. This past semester, I had 3 lab classes. And anybody that takes science classes with labs, you know that sometimes they can feel like a whole nother class, like they add that much work to your schedule. So this past semester, I, for some reason, dropped the ball on one lab assignment, forgot I had to do it, or thought that it would be easy. So, like, coming up on the day that it's due, I hadn't started. And it's, I mean, it's like not doing the work for a whole other class. That was really stressful for me.
What happened? How did you cope with that?
I stayed up and finished it. There's really no other way to do it, I guess. But after that, I used that as sort of a way to learn, and made sure that I stayed on top of my work from there on.
Yeah, that's really important, and I'm glad to hear you didn't really beat yourself up for that. One of the things that we've talked about a lot is using what you've learned in the past and your past successes to motivate you. One of the things that we talked about as well is when you make mistakes, you have to be kind to yourself, right? You don't want to dwell on it. You don't want to beat yourself up for it. Acknowledge that you made a mistake and figure out what you can learn from it going forward. So that was a really good example. The last question that I want to ask is what are some of the strategies or tools or resources that you two plan to use for this spring semester? Think about what you have on your plate. Carolina, are you taking 5 classes again?
No, no, I'm not.
Fabulous.
I
Fabulous.
don't plan on making that mistake for now. One of the biggest resources, I will say, are professors, because you can just email them. Most of them are more understanding than you guys think. And so I've emailed professors saying, listen, this assignment is taking me a lot longer than I thought it would, or no, or like, I just feel like I'm going to need more time because let's say I have an exam for calc on this day, but then I have a physical chemistry exam the next day. You can even email them and ask them if you can reschedule your exam. And so I've that's helped me so much because it gives me more time to study for some exams. I'm so sorry for my bird,
I love it. What's your bird's name?
Grumpy.
Hi, Grumpy.
He's so annoying. Um, Something that I also found really helpful was Excel because it's just a good way of organizing everything and you can always just go back in and change it. And academic advising. So that's one of my, I've been going to academic advising since my first year, and I talked to Sharon, and she's one of the best advisors I have. And she helps me with schedules and making sure that I get things done. And even if I'm not like falling behind, she's just a good place to vent to, you know? Sometimes they just listen to your stress. So I think that's one of the big
He's
things.
pretty fabulous. I'm curious, how do you use Excel? Do you kind of keep it as a list of your deadlines and due dates, as a calendar? How exactly do you use it?
Um, sometimes for like a to-do list, and then when it's due and when I should have it by. And I've also used it the past like 3 years. I have my entire schedule on it, like what classes I'm going to take, what classes I need to take, what's a requirement for my major, for my minor, the Gettysburg requirements, and like what I fulfilled, what I still need to do.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Nathan, what about you? What are some tools and resources or strategies that you plan to use for this semester?
So, two things. Since I'm going to be in person, going to the library, if it's open and if I can go, that is huge for me. Finding a space outside of my room was what really helped me last year when we were still in person. Give me a space separate that I could do my work. But I'd say the more important thing is a little planner, like a daily and monthly notebook. It's so helpful. It helps get all of like the assignments and everything else that you're thinking about out of your mind onto the page. You can let the planner deal with that so you can free up your mind for other more important things. You don't have to feel like you're going to miss something.
That is such a great point, Nathan, that you don't have to keep everything in your mind if you have it written down somewhere, right? Because that, like you said, it frees up your mind to be able to do these other things that you need to do. That's where you really want to be focusing your thoughts, your energy. You don't need to keep things in your head if you have them written down. That's great. Well, so those were all the formal questions that I had, and I think we covered some of the questions about studying remotely as well. It's not easy, and it's very likely that many of you will be studying remotely or virtually for at least part of the semester. Even if you're on campus, there may be times when you have to isolate or quarantine. So I'm glad that we were able to cover some of that. Carolina, Nathan, do you have any final thoughts or advice for everyone who's here?
I just want to add one thing about the like accountability buddy. Um, my like with me and my friend, when we were virtual, like we had to go home and we had a week of classes from home. Um, we would FaceTime for hours, and I mean it could be the same thing with the Zoom call. And even if I wasn't doing work, like sometimes some people just need somebody there to keep them focused, because my friend was in especially like hard household with a lot of kids running around. And so I think like it won't hurt if you're there for your friend and like you're not doing work, but you can just be there for them to make sure that they're getting things done.
Great, thank you. Nathan, any final thoughts?
I would say encourage yourself to meet your goals. So, the little goals that you set to help you succeed, it's important that you meet them before you reward yourself. It helps.
That is very wise. Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists. Nathan, Carolina, you're fabulous. I am so grateful for your experience and your wisdom and your insights. Thank you so much. I really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you. To all of the participants, I think you have done an amazing job. I hope that you take these worksheets and the resources that I shared today and use them. You have a couple of weeks before the start of the next semester, and you can take this time to figure out some systems and strategies that are going to work for you. Um, And when the semester starts, if you need some assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Office of Academic Advising and Student Support Services. The staff there is absolutely willing to help and to support you in any way that we can.